So, we have one life to lead, and I suppose that's a question, right? What is our footprint? And I don't mean footprint like individual legacy, but when you're walking on the beach, you want to leave your footprint somewhere that the waves don't just erase it completely, and the waves are more powerful than the print you leave on the beach. But are you going to be the last person to walk on the beach and leave nothing, or are you going to put something down? And again, I don't mean it in terms of individual legacies. The reason I very much wanted to write that book, Darker Nations, is I felt that an entire generation, maybe two generations of hard work was being erased. And it was being erased in a way that was, I thought, unfair, because after our countries went into crisis in the 80s, people, particularly, but not only in the Western Academy, were looking at our countries and saying these places are failures. Look at the news reports on Haiti now. Moises has been assassinated. Moises was a jerk, but Moises plays the role of DM, basically. The US government assassinated DM in Vietnam. He was an ally. But the moment there was some daylight, they took him out. It's not Haiti that killed Moises. You want a book to understand Haiti today? Go and read Black Jacobins. There's no better book to understand Haiti today. I mean, that has the whole theory in it, particularly the afterword. From, I think I've forgotten what it's called, something to Fidel Castro. Oh, and I'm wearing the Fidel shirt today. Something to Fidel Castro. I feel like that was really pissing me off, that our countries were like, take the case of Michael Manley. So many contradictions, but is he really the problem? I mean, was Manley the problem for Jamaica? Is he is he responsible for everything bad in Jamaica? Where's the IMF in that story? Where's imperialism? Where's the enslavement of actual human beings? Actual human beings were enslaved for hundreds of years. Where's that story? But no, it's Michael Manley. Oh, sorry. It's who's the worst person in the world? The worst person in the world is Mobutu. Mobutu's ghastly dictatorial character, but is he responsible for the whole history of the Congo? Where are the Belgians? Where is the assassination of Lumumba? And what allowed Mobutu to be what he was? What were the social conditions? And all that I felt was being erased. And and I felt we were not able to be, and I'm not a cultural nationalist, so I don't say it from that standpoint, but we were not able to be proud of our histories. We were embarrassed of our histories. And then along comes the trajectories of subaltern studies, which makes people who don't come from working class backgrounds, who don't come from peasant backgrounds in the global south, come up and start to exaggerate the struggles at the same time, as an alibi for their own class positions. And I found all that to be distressing. Like, there's a lot that we can recover. And so that book was, in a way, an act of recovery of a generation, or as I said, maybe two generations, whose work and whose attempt at creating a project was being denigrated. I actually don't even mean forgotten. It was not a cry against amnesia. It was a cry against denigration. I mean, Mrs. Gandhi put my father in jail for about 14 months. And I hated Mrs. Gandhi because she took my father away when I was, an 8-year-old boy, and I didn't see him for till I was almost 10 years old. I hated Mrs. Gandhi. But now, if I look back and I reflect, Mrs. Gandhi was a product of a moment, and she is not responsible for that. Look at what happened afterwards, the rise of the right. So how do we understand the 50s, 60s, 70s without romance? And even after that, I see a lot of books where people talk about Bandung like too romantically. You can't be romantic either about it, because it also was filled with ghastly hierarchies and limitations and so on. But God, it was a lot better than imperialism. And somehow imperialism is got off the hook, and we are to blame for everything. Imperialism is off the hook, and Bashar al-Assad is like a demon. Bashar al-Assad is a demon, but nothing that happened before that should be even considered. Don't talk about any of that. Gaddafi is like a worst horrible person, but Libyan history before, Italian colonialism, all of that, all forgotten. Let's just make Gaddafi the bad guy. I mean, what planet are we living on? So that was the motivation, I suppose. I don't know if that was the question, but that's the answer I made.
That was the answer we needed, actually. Not just us, everyone needs it, because you're absolutely right. So what we could do is, I don't know how much time you have. How much have you?
Me, I have lots of time because I was busy till now, and then I'm free for a little bit of time. Yeah.
Okay, great. So
Yeah.
let's do this, because let's have a conversation with you about anything and everything, and I'm going to tell the group. So we're going to let's if you can give us 30 minutes, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and we could do our other business. So is that cool?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So I see, and I of course let me start with, I see Rawan and Justej have their hands up.
I think just Tej was first, actually.
Okay, sorry, Justej.
Hi, Vijay. Thank you so much for your discussion, and thank you very much for your work as well. I've followed it for a while. I saw your lecture with Vincent Bevins a few months ago, who wrote the book The Jakarta Method, which everyone should definitely check out. I had a question that might be a bit boring to start out with, but it's a methodological question. How are you able to? I mean, I've read your work and I've read your books, and I'm still I'm thinking about it in relationship to my own work. How do you sort of do the thing with history, but not fall into the traps that other historians fall into, which is where they're only interested in sort of, I guess, reciting facts, or sort of taking their sole sort of claim or like goal is objectivity in a way. I'm interested in sort of how you're able to write a history that both, as you said, like advances an agenda, gives space to like the bad stuff, the violence, the imperialism, but also the possibility, the imagination. How do you do that with history? Because I've only recently I've been started reading more critical histories of the global South or global North, and there's a certain sort of subgenre where people are able to investigate those things without, being Niall Ferguson, for example. So I'm just interested in how, like, what your process is, or like methodologically how you approach that.
So I'm going to actually speak for Robin as well, if that's fine, because I mean, if you read Hammer and Hoe or Freedom Dreams, for instance, I think we follow one thing in common, which is we love the people we write about. I think it's really important. I'm not. I don't have a bloodless attitude to the past. I love those people who fought about for things. Even if I don't fully agree with them, I love what they did and I admire them. I admire the people I write about, by and large, not all, but I admire them. If you don't have an attitude of love for the past and the people of the past, you just can't do it. Just age, then you're writing about statistics. You're not writing about people. I like Eric Hobsbawm's books a lot, but Hobsbawm didn't love the people of the past. There's something bloodless about those long volumes on the 19th and 20th century. They're amazing books. It's gripping storytelling and lots of material and so on. But you just have to love the people that you write about. I mentioned Black Jacobins again. Go and read the first couple of chapters. James was a complicated man. Like, I'm not sure I would have totally enjoyed hanging out with him. I'm not sure. Like, I think he would have judged me as like like a lunatic, hooligan type character. But if you read the beginning of that book, he loves the people he's writing about. Now, I don't know if that's a methodological. Well, it is methodological. I just don't know how to write the manual on it. That's the first. It's an attitude question. The second thing I want to say is that I'm saying it in a funny way, okay? When I went to grad school, I had a terrific professor. His name was Bernard Cohen. I arrived in Chicago for, it's a long story, but I got there and it was the era of postmodernism. I couldn't understand any of the discussions in the classes. I just didn't get it. I have like a very unfortunate, my education was in my party, and I learned like classical Marxist Leninist stuff, and base, superstructure, productive forces, social means of production. I came with that architecture which I still use today. I haven't changed at all. I'm like a old fashioned 1930s type dialectical materialism person in my brain. So I get there and they're talking about power, and they're talking about structures being fluid, and I just I was like, my god, if you look out of the window where I grew up and you see the busties where the poor lives, I don't see any fucking sorry, excuse me, I don't see any fluid structures or anything. I see the most rigid form of class hierarchies and the worst kind of social oppressions, and I don't get all this stuff. I don't get Foucault. Never got it then, don't get it now. I think it's totally exaggerated stuff. I never got it. I never saw the value of Foucault's work at all. And so Bernard Cohen took me aside one day and said, listen, this is not for you, this world. It's not for you, because there's a certain way in which you have to really professionalize yourself, and you need to learn how to talk, and you need to have a certain reverence for the codes and the methods. And you can't walk into a seminar and say, I think Foucault is a bunch of bullshit. You have to really, like, you have to say, well, there are certain problems here, but and you have to always like come in with taking the epistemology of the day seriously. And I said, what if I don't agree with the epistemology? What if I think the epistemology is taking a whole generation, for a ride, and there's something wrong here? And he said, no, no, this, that, and the other. So one of the things that I'm just telling you this as a personal story. This is not me preaching to you to do anything, okay? But personally, I felt that therefore I can just do whatever I want, because I'm never going to belong. So if I want to write a book like this, I'm going to write a book like this. And if the professionals don't like it, they won't review it. It's fine. And they don't review it. And it's fine. Like book like Darker Nations is barely reviewed in the professional literature. I don't, it's okay. American Historical Review. I mean, people like me never win prizes, and we never get our work reviewed by the professionals. That's just the way it is. And that's fine. I don't need a prize from some, official body or anything. Some lifetime achievement for what lifetime achievement? I live in the gutter of that. I want the kids that's not glued to say that, oh, I read your book yesterday. To me, that's a prize. I don't need some bloody association to give me an award. So that's an attitude. And if you come to the past with that attitude, I'm telling you, you'll write differently. I don't write for the professionals. So people will say, oh, you don't look at this book or that. I'm sorry, I don't have access to JSTOR. So I don't have a library. I just take what I get, and write how I write. And I'm sorry, that's just the way it goes. So I just want to tell you that this is not, maybe it's not an answer that you can write the methodological kind of, but it is actually, because the method isn't just mechanisms. You read a book, you cite it like this. A method is also your attitude to what you're doing. And I think we don't talk about attitude enough, which is called stance. What's your stance? Where do you stand? Like, I can be for the working class and criticize the working class at the same time, but demonstrate through love that I'm with them. Do you understand? Like, to be with the working class doesn't mean you have to say everything. The working class is shit, okay? I know, I grew up in that area. It's shit. There are people drunk, the terrible violence inside households. Don't romanticize it. It's not good. At the same time, I'm with it. You see what I'm talking about? It's that stance question. Stance doesn't mean you exaggerate anything. You have to be real about it. You have to see the limitations. You have to see where you can push an agenda and so on. So that's it. It's love and it's irreverence. I mean, if you want to have a career of a certain kind, this is not the way to do it.
Yes. And now everyone understands why I love that man. right? You understand why. It should be very clear. And I should just remind you before we're going to go to Rowan, and after that we're going to go to Megan, whose hand function doesn't work, so I missed her. But let me just say, I didn't mention Vijay's first book, right, which is about Dalits. It's Untouchable Freedom, the social history of Dalit community, and he's looks at street sweepers, and no, people were not writing. I guess the book came out, was it 1999 or so?
1999.
Yeah. It came out when people weren't really writing about Dalit's political history, you know, and it's a groundbreaking book. And one of the things that he argues or concludes is that the irony is that their very struggle for acceptance as full human beings in a kind of critique of caste still invested some of these movements in the very institutions that kept them locked into sanitation work, and that's what it means to love people you write about, is to understand all aspects of their lives, how they are able to make it the next day, and what are the limits to the kind of vision that they're trying to produce in process of struggle, and what does it also mean to write history that people could actually read, which is something, and that's not even new. This is the whole history of our profession. I mean, that's why Du Bois got so much flack, like before Black Reconstruction, which wasn't reviewed in American Historical Review. And James is not considered, real historian. I mean, there's so many examples of that we can go back forth on. But yeah, I'm just saying, this is the answer you want. So, okay, so we're going to Rowan and then Megan. Megan.
Thank you so much, firstly, for the talk and also for that response. I agree with everything that's in the chat. The energy is just so infectious, and I'm just like, there's so many questions I have. And I feel like you already answered partially the question that I have, but I think something that I'm struggling with constantly, and I'm glad you mentioned Bashar al-Assad, because that's someone, so I'm Palestinian. I grew up in Syria, born and raised in like refugee camps and things like that. And so yeah, it's just, there's a lot of violence, of course, that has come out of the Assad regime, but then trying to understand for Palestinians in particular, how, he's very a staunch supporter of Palestine and also an anti-imperialist and ran as a leftist and all of these different things. And like, still trying to like talk about the violence that was implicated onto Syrians as well as like Palestinians in refugee camps, but still the history of how we got to Bashar al-Assad, for instance, and this is the case for like dictators in general. So I think the multiple layers of also not trying to reproduce the West's discourse on Bashar al-Assad as well. So like, I'm just not sure how to juggle all of these things while still being like, okay, there's still violence that's being implicated, but where is this violence stemming from? And also, once we do talk about where the violence is stemming from, not trying to reproduce the West's discourse on these things. So
this is one of those terrific questions because it takes us right to the kind of Twitter wars that take place and the sort of reputation battles. You are a Bashar al-Assad troll or whatever. No, it's not that, it's something else. Assadists and tankies and whatever the hell happens online. See, firstly, in my opinion, let's take a look at Iraq. The United States prosecuting, let's just start with 1991. The bombing of Iraq, the sanctions policy, the war, the occupation, and so on. There is no more brutal set of people than US presidents from Clinton onward. Because let's face it, 1-2 million dead in Iraq. What is it? I mean, I first went to Iraq in 2006. I was in a home of a journalist. I went in to eat dinner. I knew them both, the couple, excellent people. And I noticed I hadn't seen her in about 2 years, and she was wearing a headscarf. And I was puzzled by that, like, because, they are drinkers and there's no piety in their relationship or in her perspective in the world. She's not doesn't have piety as part of her worldview. So why was she wearing a headscarf? And then we were eating dinner and chatting and what, I mean, we were drinking and it was fun. And then her headscarf slipped and I saw that half her face was burnt, and she had been, in an explosion. And so she wore the headscarf and then she started telling me about it, and we basically talked about how every house in Iraq, every house has lost somebody or been physically marked by that US war. So millions of people's lives damaged by these gangsters, Bush, Clinton, all of them, Obama, you name it. And yet it's Assad who's the dictator. I mean, that's what I want you to start with. And yet it's a bunch of, mostly, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little blunt, it's a bunch of white guys on Twitter who'll attack you for being a tanky, and they have no perspective on the fact that their own presidents, one by one by one by one, have destroyed countries and killed millions of people. And then you'll have a report saying, 10,000 people Assad has killed. 10,000, that's a lot, that's horrendous, immoral. But let's also understand the world a little bit better. Gaddafi is a genocidal. Oh my God, Gaddafi is a genocidal. Look at what the French are doing now in North Africa, with G5 Sahel, how they're garrisoning the whole Sahel region and so on and so forth. And what the French did in West Africa, go and look at Sembene's film, The Camp at Theory. What a film, look at the brutalities inflicted by these people, and suddenly they are the saviors, and the barbarian is the colored dictator. That's the barbarian, one after the other, rogues gallery. So let's start there. Not to say that Assad is like an anti-imperialist hero. There are contradictions in the world. Let's look at North Africa. The US just ran a military exercise, one of the largest we've seen, called African Lion. What a name for a military exercise. It's a NATO US government, just last month in June. Morocco, Tunisia, and Senegal were the main participants in this, but no Algeria. No, Algeria refuses to participate in all of these things. Now, how do we judge? The Algerian government now is gerontocratic. These are all ancient fellas who were all military officers, but they refuse to participate in these US military endeavors and so on. Uh, the world is a complicated place. Why can't we have a dialectical understanding of our struggles, of our relationship to politics? Politics is messy, by the way. It's never a clean thing. I'll have my friends who are so hardcore rigorous about Assad is a dictator, and then they'll say, vote for Biden. He's better than Trump. How did you make that compromise in this case? Why should you say vote if you're going to be, no, we can't compromise, we must have a completely moral and completely coherent policy? Why do you then suddenly say, oh, it's okay to have a compromise on US elections? So I find all this saturated with racism, if you don't mind me saying this. There's a real racist sense of all this. The barbarian is always that other fellow. Why isn't Tony Blair a barbarian? you know why isn't he a barbarian? No, the barbarian is always this other fellow, and it's often the fellow with a mustache and with who has some like left behind in the 70s sort of look. They haven't advanced to the postmodern era. They're not like, even Boris Johnson. He's got sophisticated, he's so cultured, he knows Greek and so on. Suddenly these fellows aren't barbarians, and it's always this other. Manuel Noriega wears short pants. He's a short little fellow. Or Evo Morales. He's a barbarian. On Twitter, people will say Evo Morales doesn't know how to read. See, because he's an indigenous guy. He's a coca farmer. What? Nicolas Maduro is a bus driver. You hear this all the time. He's a bus driver. I'll take a bus driver any day over somebody educated at Eton and Harrow and whatever. I like bus drivers. I like coca farmers. By the way, they have good experience with coca. You can have good discussions with them about what's the difference between coca paste and powder and so on. At least they have practical experience on something. If I'm stuck in a room with Evo, at least I can chat about all this stuff. Imagine being stuck in a room with Bill Clinton. I'll be holding my clothing close to me. The lecherous bastard. I don't want him to even look in my direction. So, but he is not the barbarian. You see, now George W. Bush is a painter. So you see, that's what I mean, I may not be answering your question directly, Ravan, because in a way I don't want to, because I'm trying to say we shouldn't have a formulaic understanding about the world. Litmus test: is he good, is he bad? In the whole Syria thing, the whole thing was, are you for Assad or against Assad? That's not the point. There are millions of Syrians, and the millions of Syrians are also thinking, what's the alternative? It's this state, or it's we're going to be under the Muslim Brotherhood. And I'm a Christian, I'm an Armenian, I don't want the Muslim Brotherhood. Nobody wants to listen to those voices. You see, you're always listening to these Syrians who are in Turkey, who are the Brotherhood that say they're not the Brotherhood. And I mean, that's disturbing to me. So the very people who are upset about Morsi coming to power in Egypt were in favor of overthrowing Assad in Syria. And I'm like, guys, just get it together, okay? The world is an ugly place. It's an ugly place. You have to adjust yourself to the realities as we have a revolutionary agenda. And I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that we have a revolutionary agenda, but we have to adjust to where we are and what we're driving. And also the mass line. Robin, the old phrase, what's the mass line? We don't just have a class line. What's the mass line? What's going to attract people to our hegemonic project?
Right. Exactly. Whew. You're on fire as always, Vijay. Okay, so we got enough time for two questions. So Megan and then Zara, and then we'll close out. So Megan.
Vijay, thank you so much for all your comments and your work, which is so inspiring. And Rowan, I thought your question was also really important, because I think you're hinting at, Vijay's hinting at like deep, deep historical reads that brings and it's a theme in many of the students have brought up, deeper temporalities or ecologies of ideas that span different geographical contexts. I appreciate so much all the humor you're bringing in. I was trying to fumble through my notes to find some good questions based on your work, and I came up, I returned to two of my favorite quotes of yours, which are the deep critique with the humor. The invisible hand is always white, which is like pow, right to the point. And then, why did the French forget about liberté, égalité, and fraternité when they went to the tropics? So anyway, but returning to the Darker Nations, I had the experience when reading it of feeling very exhilarated and inspired reading about these liberatory struggles. And then I fell into kind of a depression when you read about all the multiple coups that took place. So I'm trying to return to this question. You described this pattern so well in your book of this colonial elite that was established by the regimes in different parts of the world, who usurp the liberation struggle. This pattern of the coups, which are like a strata that create a kind of differentiation and an elite installed by the colonial powers. So I think this brings up the question we've been trying to address throughout this course about like different strategies of organizing, Commonwealth, Pan-Africanism, organizing around the nations, outside the nation state. And then my second question is, I saw your talk at the People's Forum. Someone was speaking about the situation in Venezuela, and you were introducing your new book, which talks about debt as a weapon and sanctions, and 3/4 of the world are under US-backed sanctions. And we haven't really talked about debt as a weapon that much in the course yet, but so thank you for your work.
Yeah. There's a lot there in your thoughts. And so I'm going to pick a few things to talk about. One of them is your reaction to the coups and even the debt crisis, let's say. You said it was depressing, or it put you into depression. But history moves in very strange cycles, and history is not separate from you and me. And in a way, in after he died, Engels was going through Marx's writings, and he found all these notes and jottings, and and we now get them as like published in a book. One of them was his thesis on Feuerbach, which he had just sort of jotted down, and it was not really, I don't even think, for publication. The 11th thesis is very interesting, and I think Marx didn't write it properly. The way it's written, at least in English, is that the philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. But I actually think Marx didn't mean that. What Marx actually meant was that when you're fighting to change the world, you can see it better. In other words, that if you don't fight to see the world, you can't understand the constraints properly. If you're fighting, like if you're a tenant rights person, right? You're struggling in Toronto, tenant rights, and suddenly you get the whip of the landlords. You understand how power and structures work, then you get it. It's not a theoretical thing. You understand how, when the mousetrap closes on you, how much liberalism there is, and then snap, it closes. So as you're trying to change the world, you can better understand power and the structures and the class realities and social hierarchies and things like that. So if you're looking at it like that, in a way, you have to understand that there's a joy in trying to change the world, and your experience of what the world is will improve. Of course, it's depressing to lose, but losing is only temporary. Look at this. Thomas Sankara comes to power in 1983. One of my favorite people of the revolutionary movement that I saw in my life, meaning he was alive when I was alive. Fidel Castro is another, Sankara certainly, Chavez, and so on. But Sankara was interesting because Sankara comes in, and now this is a wretchedly poor country, and it's a wretchedly poor country, Upper Volta. And the early thing he does is he makes a whole political thing, and they change the name to Burkina Faso, which means land of upright people. Wow. From above the river, what a stupid name, right? Upper Volta. You live above the river. He says, no, we are not just above the river, we are land of upright people. And then he drives like a hard left agenda, while he's playing his electric guitar. And, he's an amazing guy. And he says to his people, he says, once a week, women will not enter the kitchen or clean clothes or anything. Once a week, by law, men have to do everything. Interesting, innovative thing. And then he's assassinated in 87, 3.5 years after coming to power. We cried when he was killed because he was a real hero. When he came to the UN, I mean, you saw pictures of this beautiful man with a beret, throwback to what one had heard before we were born, of revolutionary national liberation fighters, the Che Guevara of Africa, like that. He was assassinated. Today, in Burkina Faso, there are more pictures of Thomas Sankara than there are of his killers. The young Sankaraists are on the move. They're driving the Sankara agenda. So what depressed, Megan? What depressed? We will always come back. Right now, the left is weak in many parts of the world, but we don't disappear. We will always come back. Robin wrote that book on the hammer and hoe, agricultural workers, black workers of the South organizing, Communist Party, and so on. I was talking to Ben Wilkins, who is one of the leaders of Fight for 15 in North Carolina. They have like 20,000 members. That's the hammer and hoe. Those are the very people who are doing the same history again. So, we just don't go away because the contradictions are too deep. Yes, for a moment, a movement can surrender. A project can be destroyed, but it always returns. I spent the last 2 weeks in Caracas. I really found, again, the situation is very difficult. The sanctions are harsh. Talked to lots of different people, went to many comunas, and the people are like, we're still building the communa project. We're building communes. That's what we're doing. We're growing vegetables in the middle of the city. Hello, Grace Lee Boggs, growing vegetables in the middle of the city. It doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. You'll have, from Pompeo to Blinken in Washington wanting to overthrow and destroy the Venezuelans. They look you in the eye and they say, we are Chavistas. We don't care, till the last person. I go to Cuba often. Cuba is the same, it's a miserable shape. It's not easy to withstand the kind of embargo. But these people are like, they are oblivious to that in one respect. We have a project, you know. And by the way, when you meet Cubans, they are like Jedi Knights of socialism. There's something luminous about the Cuban, you know, something really luminous. There was a Cuban boxer called Julio Cesar. He's a top welterweight champion. I once ran into Julio Cesar. He's one. If you get a chance, watch him on YouTube. He's an amazing boxer. The guy is luminous. You know, there's something powerful about being. It's a silly word, but a free person. There's something amazing about that. Now, it's a wretched, contradictory situation. It's not easy to advance those projects, but depression. No, no. Listen, I'm congenitally a depressive person. Like, I always feel I have not done enough in my life. I'm a shit. I'm a this. I'm a that. You know, that's a personal struggle. But depression for the world, don't waste your time. Don't waste your time, because people out there don't need you to be depressed. They just don't need it. I mean, you know, you getting depressed because of one political defeat doesn't advance anything. If you're going to get depressed for a good reason, which is that you're a personal shit, and then advance from there. You know, get out of your problems, your traumas, and so on. That is a worthwhile depression. I struggled with all my traumas and childhood shit and whatever. That's me. But for the world, no, no. I look at the world and I say, man, it's very complicated. And, you know, people are always on the move. Always, always on the move. Not once in our history, in our time, have we seen history stop. Never, never. It's always happening. And that's where we start, right? I don't know where you live. Maybe you are also in Canada. Um, Look at those stories of the schools and the Native American children and the buried bodies and things, you know. But that's as if it's in the past. What about all the women that disappeared and are killed over I remember reading about this about, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, this stuff. But then the movements, where are they? They are still there. They are still fighting. They are the ones who are revealing all this stuff, you know. You think Justin Trudeau by himself wants to talk about all this? No, no. There are people with a gun to his head saying, talk. You know, we are here. We are not going anywhere. That's what you have to look at. It's not the day of the coup. And lastly, uh, you know, I wrote the book Washington Bullets because of the coup in Bolivia. The book came out, published, and then what? During the writing of the book, I was talking to people in Bolivia, and they were like, "We are not going to give up." And I thought, man, the history is against you. Look at Honduras. History is against you. And then there's an election, and they triumph. They overturn the coup government. And then I'm saying, look at Honduras. 2 days ago, David Castillo was found guilty of the murder of Beta. You know, we continue to advance. That's it, right? That's it.
That is it. We have one last comment, and I'm going to say something at the end, and we'll let you go. So, Zara.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very uplifting view of things, which I think is not how all of us feel. But yeah, thank you so much for all your work. And I guess I wanted to come back to the previous comments that you made and maybe revisit that. Maybe that's not something that you'd like to do, but you talked about how when we think about the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and you say it was filled with ghastly hierarchies and lots of things that, were pretty terrible that also happened. And, you talk in your book about Tanzania's experiment with Ujamaa and all the sort of ideals that were behind that, but then also how that didn't work well. And so I'm just wondering, how do you think we do reckon with that part of history, with those excesses, with the hierarchies, I understand what you're saying, that, we, rather than looking narrowly at the failures or whatever, the whole history of power and so on. But how do we reckon with those excesses and that history? And then the other question I just had very quickly was whether you have any thoughts on China's role in East Africa or in Africa generally now. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Your first question is about judgment or the historical judgment, where the historical imagination judges. I think that's, if I can. That's the kind of question, how do you, so let's take the Ujama period. I just got from our friend Isa Shivji, the 3-volume work on Nirere, and it's sitting over there. It's amazing text, published by Walter Bagoya. Huge. I haven't started reading them yet, Robin. I don't know if you looked at it. It's incredible.
I
Um,
I blurbed them.
yeah, okay.
Like, so
They're huge.
I read all 3 volumes.
Yeah, it's impressive. I suppose the first way in which I would look at something like that is to look at, let's say, 2 features. One is the class nature of the project, and the second is and I'm going to use a silly word, but what was the intention of the project? So if you look at Nyerere's entire career in Tanzania, did he intend to do something? And he intended to bring something that they called African socialism, Ojama, and so on. Well, let's take them at their word, and then there's an articulated project. We see that in Arusha Declaration. We see that in other of his speeches and writings on development in particular. And I have a special interest in Nyerere because in Poorer Nations, I wrote about the South Commission, which he was the chairman of, and spent a lot of time reading that archive of the South Commission, which last year was all destroyed. And I have fortunately copied a lot of it. And so I'm looking for a place to give the papers of the South Commission, which was literally thrown in a dumpster last year in Geneva. That's the first thing, is what was the intention? We know, for instance, we can judge the intention of the government, the coup government after the death of Lumumba. Mobutu's intention was pretty clear, made clear by him and so on. When Mobutu died, for instance, the total external debt of Zaire was equivalent to the bank accounts that Mobutu had in Switzerland. That's a good indicator of the intention of the Mobutu period. It was about personal aggrandizement, about entrenching the elite, and so on. In Tanzania, it was complicated. He wanted to drive a socialist agenda, but he didn't want to touch the elite in Tanzania. They feared that if they touched the elite, there'd be a coup. Nyerere was fairly conservative on that. You don't want to irritate imperialism too much. You don't want to touch the elites too much. You want to drive socialism. Julius, you can't do all those things, but that was the intention. We can have a conversation about the intention. That the intention wasn't to personally aggrandize or to aggrandize the elite and so on. So my judgment would start there. Secondly, I would like to assess what were the various cost benefits that you were willing to tolerate. In any agenda of this kind, there will be cost benefits. There will be people who will have to move from one part of the country to another. If you're going to say we're going to electrify Tanzania, you're going to build a dam. There are only 4 or 5 ways to bring electricity to a country. You're going to have to either import oil, you're going to have to find coal, you're going to have to build a dam, you're going to have to do one of a few things for which we have the technology. Obviously, ideally, you do nothing and just draw the sun's energy but you can't. We don't know how to do that. So we have to do one of these things. That's a cost-benefit analysis. Which communities are going to suffer for the greater good? Is it worthwhile? Obviously not for those communities, but these are serious practical discussions that, because we are not idealists in the sense that, look, I believe we need electrification. Today, I say every household should have an internet connection. It's about basic democracy. I would like to have piped energy so that we don't have highly excruciating gender division of labor where but mostly a woman in the house is going to have to walk 3 miles to collect firewood to come in, light the stove, then walk another mile to collect water, bring it in. We want to pipe water. We want to pipe energy so that the material basis for women's emancipation is available. These are all real things. So now, if you're going to do all those things, there are cost-benefit analyses. When I read that James Scott's book, Seeing Like a State, I was totally disappointed with the book because he didn't seem to care about the fact that you have to electrify a country, that you need piped water. I mean, he lives in New Haven, in Connecticut. He doesn't think about these things, and he's a man. He doesn't think about the fact that in our societies, the woman in the house is going to have to spend 3/4 of a day doing these things. He doesn't seem to care about it. So he says, oh, the dam was too big, or they did this wrong. Okay, James, what would you do? How would you ensure that we have the material basis for the emancipation of women? So that's the second way in which I would, start. I suppose, in a way, I mean, just this is the methodology in a way. If you're going to start to judge a project, that's being done by a state, you have to judge it based on some criteria. And the criteria for me, and I'm not embarrassed to say, there is a cost benefit analysis. Some people are going to suffer for the greater good to benefit, and I think that's I'm fine with that. I think that's okay. Now the question is, who has to pay the price, and why is it always the same people that pay the price? Indigenous people, marginal people. Why is it always the same people? Why don't you build the power plant in the middle of the elite family's neighborhood for once? So that's a good discussion to have. I'm not unaware of that. I don't say some people have to and then let the same people always pay the price, right? So, but in a sense, I mean, Zara, these are the kinds of ways in which we judge projects. We should try to judge it as best as possible, as honestly as possible, without attempting to be too utopian. Because it frustrates me when people talk about, okay, why are they mining the lithium? Well, because that's the resource they have, and they need to earn capital in order to do all these things. It's a kind of resource socialist agenda. No, no, we are against extractivism. It's okay for you to say that. You're writing so many articles against extractivism on a computer like this, which is made of all these minerals that have been extracted from somewhere. What kind of hypocritical person are you? Let's have some honesty. You understand? That's the way. So again, when we talk about China and Africa, Tricontinental, we just released a dossier 2 days ago on US and French bases in Africa. There's a whole section in there on China and Africa. It's so interesting that the US government says China is colonizing Africa. I love that expression. Till now we've had no accounting from the Europeans about their actual tangible colonial history in Africa. The Belgians are now releasing a tooth from Lumumba. Imagine that there was a tooth taken from Lumumba's corpse and kept as a relic in Belgium. Only now it is returning to and I'm not in favor of any kind of like his tooth should now be a relic. Come on, we don't need that in our movement. But still, look at the disrespect to the people of the Congo, to the family of Lumumba, and so on. I met his son in Caracas, Ronald, amazing guy. And I asked him, what does it feel like? He said, it's a relief, to have the tooth back. Although, for God's sake, this is 1961. It's his dad's tooth. I mean, it's not like they've been waiting for the tooth to come back. It's the disrespect. That's the issue. It's not the tooth by itself. So they say, oh, China is colonizing. Now, what's interesting is, see, Zara, there is a contest going on between two forms of development financing. One is the IMF US Treasury Department route, and the other is Belt and Road. What's wrong with giving countries a choice between two forms of financing? The problem isn't China. The problem is our countries don't have an agenda. The government of Zambia, under that bloody crazy Lugo, who's trying to prevent an election this year, the government of Zambia under Lugo has no identifiable plan for the future of Zambia. They just take money, go into debt, default, and so on. 60% of the children in the country, and that's the bulk of the kids who live in the copper belt, don't know how to read in Zambia. And these are the kids who can't read the deals signed by Lugo's government with the Canadian mining companies. You know that almost 2/3 of world mining companies are domiciled in Canada. Canadian mining companies wreak havoc in Africa, but it's always the Chinese that are to blame. Barrick Gold, for instance, which is a Canadian company, at Tricon we made a text about this, about Canadian mining companies. Barrick Gold, their leader, who's Monk, the School of International Affairs at University of Toronto is named after that scoundrel. Monk wrote in the Toronto Mail and Guardian or Globe, he wrote an article saying that you should overthrow Chavez. Direct call for regime change. That's a Canadian mining company. Got to deal with these people in a way. So it's not that China is out there, bringing socialism to Africa, but certainly it's giving an alternative financing for development. Now, You can decide. Do you want to take the financing? You think it's in bad terms? Don't take it. They're not bringing planes and bombing you and forcing you to take financing. They are coming to your office, knocking on the door, saying, "Here's, you want this? Take it. Don't want it? Don't take it." But you have a choice now between IMF money and BRI money. If there's a third source, take the third source by all means. So it's different than colonialism. We know what colonialism was. Colonialism meant they came, they put a gun to your head, they said, "Your land is now our land." This is not colonialism. This is capitalism. This is business. It's ugly. And again, don't take the money then. Look at Sri Lanka, the Hambantota port. A Canadian company, SNC Lavalin. You may know this company, SNC Lavalin. It's a very big multinational, but Canadian company. Did a feasibility study to build the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. And they said there should be two phases. Phase one, and then stop the construction, start using the port, make money, and based on the money you make, start phase two. So there's a complicated story about that, but then Sri Lanka decided not to go with European funders and went with the Chinese. Chinese built phase one. Then the Sri Lankans said, "Now give us money for phase two." The Chinese funders said, "We don't want to because Lavalin study is credible. You should now." They said, "No, give us money for phase two." Chinese gave them money. They went broke. Then they came to the Chinese and say, "You run the port." Now it's very interesting. Pompeo says that's an example of how the Chinese are using debt to seize assets. You should read the article in the Atlantic magazine. That's not the Socialist Worker or anything, in the Atlantic magazine, which shows that Pompeo story is wrong. That this is a case where the Sri Lankans had screwed it up. We need our own project. We need our own plans. We shouldn't be blaming this, that, and the other. At this stage in history, our government should be their feet should be put to the fire. What is your plan? In India, this right-wing government abolished the planning ministry. We had a very good planning ministry. Now it's called Niti Aayog. Now these fellows sit in that beautiful old office in Delhi and they observe astrological charts.
Yes, well, our time is up, and that was a great. You gave us so much to think about. Let me just say a couple of things before we take a break, and we're just gonna come back for a little while to actually have a conversation about South-South dialogue, actually, which is a really important issue. So, Honor and Anna know that when they asked me who do I want to invite to the seminar, the first name that came up was Vijay Prashad. Now you know why. I don't have to explain to you, nor do you have to find a Cuban to see a luminous Jedi of the left because you just heard one. And this is my friend, my comrade Vijay Prashad, Jedi of the left, the very walking luminosity and truth teller, even if it's stuff that we don't necessarily want to hear. So thank you, Vijay, for giving us so much of your time.